Before this video begins, two things I want to say. The first being that this video ended up being massive and is easily the longest I've ever worked on a video. For that reason, I decided to split it into two parts. One that will hopefully release before the 10th anniversary, and one that will probably release afterwards. The second being that I want to thank the patrons on screen now, and if you want your name on screen in the next video, be sure to donate to the Patreon listed below. Anyway, on with the video. 10 years ago, Five Nights at Freddy's came out and blew up the indie horror scene permanently, and in post-FNaF World we've seen the rise and fall of all sorts of titles in the newly created mascot horror genre. Without FNaF, we probably wouldn't have titles like Bendy, Poppy Playtime, Indigo Park, etc, etc. And while not every game released in FNaF's wake has been good, I think it just goes to show how much influence this simple horror game has had, and I want to celebrate it. Early on in my YouTube career, I took influence from one specific person who you may have seen before, Sagan Hawks, who released an extremely long video that served as a retrospective for, at the time, the entire FNaF series, which at that point was FNaF 1 up to Help Wanted. Since then, we've seen the release of Security Breach, Ruin, and Help Wanted 2, as well as several books and even the movie. Today, I want to give my own retrospective on the series. I went back and played every game in the series to re-evaluate how good they were, and decided I wanted to do the same thing Sagan did, but from my point of view, and covering the newer games. But not just that either. I also want to cover other important corners of the FNaF media, like books, merchandise, and whatever else I feel like talking about. So let's not waste any more time and get right into it, starting with the one and only Five Nights at Freddy's.
Hello everybody, my name is Markiplier and welcome to Five Nights at Freddy's.
Help wanted. Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. Family pizzeria looking for security guard to work the night shift.
Oh god! Oh. It was only the fan.
FNaF 1 is an easy contender for the best game in the series in terms of gameplay and artistry, but how well does it hold up now? In 2014, Scott Cawthon developed FNaF 1 after the critical reception of his last game, Chipper & Sons Lumber Company, was extremely negative. One of the biggest criticisms levied against the game came down to the character designs, with them being likened to creepy Chuck E. Cheese-esque animatronics rather than the living characters that they were meant to be. This criticism inspired Cawthon to make one final Hail Mary of a game. At the time, he felt that he spent too much time dedicating himself to massive projects that took literal years to develop with no payoff. Five Nights at Freddy's would be experimental for him, with his mindset going in being that the players should get the same experience playing for 5 minutes that they would for an hour. This leads to FNaF 1 being pretty short, even if its nights are actually quite long when compared to other games in the series. Cawthon leaned into the criticisms of Chipper and decided to purposely make his characters into creepy animatronics, giving us Freddy, Bonnie, and Chica relatively naturally. Foxy was the odd one out, and Cawthon spent much time navigating between a beaver and wolf character before settling on a fox. The final product was Five Nights at Freddy's. In this game, you play as a security guard at Freddy Fazbear's Pizza, a pizza place where fantasy and fun come to life. At night, your job is to watch over the animatronics that move about the restaurant, springing to life and seemingly coming after you. I'm gonna explain each of these original characters because I just really enjoy FNaF 1, and I don't intend on doing that for every game. By the way, I'm going to be referring a lot to how the animatronics move, which is a fascinating subject, and the info comes from the channel Tech Rules. You've probably seen this video, but if you haven't, there it is, and I'm also going to link it in the description. Bonnie the Bunny is the first character who's going to be active in a typical playthrough. He can be characterized by his bluish-purple fur, red bow tie, and the fact that he's the guitarist of the band. He's also the only character in the first game to not have any eyebrows, which I think definitely adds to his creepiness. From a gameplay standpoint, Bonnie is also the most quote-unquote aggressive character. This is how he's usually described, but it's not entirely accurate. You see, every character in this game functions on essentially the same AI. They all have an internal clock that ticks down, and after that timer runs out, a number is generated. If that number is within a specific range, the animatronic will advance a stage. The reason Bonnie is typically seen as the most aggressive character is because how he moves is admittedly a bit different than Freddy or Chica. Bonnie will advance towards your office, yes, but he's also capable of skipping stages of advancement, appearing an extra step ahead if he feels like it. This gives off the impression that he teleports. During normal gameplay, however, his AI is typically lower than Chica's. If you tally up every knight's aggression levels for each animatronic, Bonnie's total aggression level across all 6 knights is 38, while Chica's is 41. A small difference, but one that shows how Bonnie's movement can be deceptively aggressive. By the way, if you want to know how this was calculated, I added up all the base aggression levels each animatronic has at the beginning of the night, and then added the additional aggression they gain as the night continues. Bonnie gains 3 aggression levels per night and Chica gains 2, but Bonnie pretty much every night starts with a much lower aggression level than Chica. Speaking of, Chica is a yellow chicken wearing a bib that says "Let's eat" and holding a cupcake when she's on the stage. Anyway, Chica is much the same as Bonnie, but because she doesn't teleport like he does, her path is much longer, leading her through the dining room, bathrooms, kitchen, hall, and then the hall corner. However, Chica is typically less intense to deal with because she has an obvious tell that Bonnie does not. Whenever she is in the kitchen, you can hear her banging around with pots and pans, which might be a nod to her character being driven by food. Or maybe she's just clumsy. In any case, let's move on to Foxy. Foxy is a dark red pirate fox character with significant damage to his cloth body covering, meaning there's gashes in his upper half and his bottom half is entirely bare. Foxy as a character was also the only one in the original game Scott had difficulties designing, as he was unsure of what species he wanted the Pirate Cove character to be. We all know that a fox won out now let's talk about movement. Foxy is maybe the most complex character from a technical standpoint, although once you understand how and why he moves, he's pretty simple. You basically just have to think of Foxy like Chica or Bonnie, but all of his stages happen across 2 cameras. Foxy will slowly begin to peek out of Pirate's Cove, with there being 3 stages before he leaves Pirate's Cove to attack. In his first stage, the curtain is closed. In his second, he's looking out, and in the third, he's completely outside of the cove. This is his most dangerous stage. Once he leaves, he's beginning his attack, and can be seen running down the hall on the left side. Shut the door on him, and he'll return to Pirate's Cove and try again. What makes Foxy a pain to deal with is not necessarily his running, it's what he does when he gets to your door. He'll bang on it, which drains some of your power. Ultimately, it's more ideal for Foxy to never leave Pirate's Cove in the first place. So, how do you do that? Well, Foxy's movement is tied to the camera usage. Basically, when you look at Foxy, he cannot move. His movement timer is still active, but for as long as the cameras are up, he cannot advance through his stages. Freddy is the main antagonist, and his movement is actually kinda hard to understand at first. He's a brown bear with a top hat and tie, and also the first ever character Scott modeled for the game, kind of unsurprisingly. In this first game, he's defined pretty heavily by his stealth. When Freddy leaves the stage starting late into Night 3, he hides from the cameras, often only being seen by his glowing eyes in the dark, such as here in the dining room or here at the end of the hall. This makes him pretty difficult to track at first, but trust me, it gets worse. Foxy, Bonnie, and Chica all reset after their attacks fail. But Freddy? Not really. After Freddy reaches your office corner, you have to make sure you keep the camera on him and shut the door, and keep it shut until he leaves. This makes Freddy easily the hardest character to deal with, at least in my opinion. He makes for an amazing final boss character of sorts, with his mechanics straining everything you've learned so far to a high degree. All of this while balancing power. Now, I might drop a hot take here, but I've never liked how FNaF 1 handles power, but that doesn't mean it's bad, it just means I'm a bitch. Power will steadily drain throughout the night, accelerated by your actions such as using the cameras or shutting the doors. This means that you can't rely too heavily on any of your tools because without power, it's basically game over. You can still win in the event of a power outage, but you should never count on this. When the power goes out, Freddy arrives from the dark, humming the Toreador March. After the jingle stops, which can be for a very short or a very long time, there's a short grace period before Freddy jump scares you and you die. All things considered, even though I'm not too excited to throw myself into the power drain meat grinder all the time, I still think this is the single best death you can get in a FNaF game. It's a whole sequence, and the fact that you still have a chance of escaping, I think overall makes it more impactful. This is honestly something that future games lose points on for me. With the first game, even when you were failing badly, there's never a point where you just say, I give up. Even when you run out of power and you are effectively dead, there's still a chance you make it out. I could bore you now with the story, but it's FNaF 1, there really isn't much. That's part of why I decided to mostly focus on gameplay here, since the narrative behind FNaF 1 is basically just what I said earlier. Sure, later entries recontextualize this game heavily, but we'll get to those revelations later on. The only real story additional to what Phone Guy tells you is that these animatronics are not actually malfunctioning. They are instead being possessed by the ghosts of children who went missing at Freddy's, with their bodies stuffed inside of them, never to be recovered. I especially love how it's described that parents would notice blood and mucus around the animatronics' eyes and mouths. That's such a gross detail that doesn't really get matched in my opinion. It's a creepy mental image. So FNaF 1 is an absolute masterpiece of a first entry, and truth be told might just be my favorite. My favorite entry bounces around a lot, but FNaF 1 gave us so much to love and furthermore respect. Later on down the series, I feel like a lot of what FNaF 1 did right would change. Not necessarily be lost, but there was definitely some sort of mutation. So how about FNaF 2? Five Nights at Freddy's 2 came just a few months after the original and expanded the series in some pretty huge ways, establishing ideas of a temporally displaced order, given it wasn't clear if the game came before or after FNaF 1 for some time. And that's just the tip of the iceberg. In terms of gameplay, FNaF 2 is much more complicated, given just how many characters are in the game, so I won't be covering that element too much outside of what the game actually presents the player with. This time, you're in a building with no doors and no power to manage. Instead, you have one open hall in front of you, two vents on either side, and a music box to manage. The hall in front is where you can expect attacks from Toy Freddy, Withered Freddy, and Foxy, with all other characters arriving through the vents. This makes the hall in front actually almost redundant, and would it not be for Foxy, totally useless. The music box keeps one animatronic at bay, the puppet, who after the box winds down fully, will attack. You can think of the puppet as our replacement for the power meter, as it's one of the few resources we always have to keep in check. If the box ticks down fully, then the puppet is set free and you only have a few seconds before you die. This is similar to the power outage from FNaF 1, but in my opinion it's way less interesting and way less survivable. Let's talk Foxy. Foxy is kind of the same idea as in FNaF 1, only this time instead of checking the camera, you check the hall. If he's there, flash him and he'll go away. If Foxy goes too long without the flashlight being used, you've lost. For vent animatronics we have Bonnie and Bonnie, Chica and Chica, Mangle, and Balloon Boy. Golden Freddy is also here rarely, appearing in your office. I didn't bring him up in FNaF 1 because I don't like him, but in this game he's actually a character worth learning how to defend against since he'll be popping up during your basic gameplay, especially on night 6 and 7. The Bonnies and Chicas are basically what you expect, but Mangle and Balloon Boy are a bit different. Balloon Boy won't kill you if he gets into your office. Instead, he'll take the batteries from your flashlight. This makes him especially deadly on nights where Foxy is a present threat. Mangle does behave like the others, but with an obvious tell. You'll hear their radio going nuts when they're just about in your office. On top of that, if Mangle does get in, you won't die right away. Instead, you'll die at a random point in the night, which does mean you can actually survive if they decide never to attack. In order to defend against every animatronic except Foxy and the puppet, you need to use a Freddy Fazbear mask, tricking the animatronic into seeing you as a robot and leaving. When you put on the mask varies from animatronic to animatronic, but a general rule of thumb is if you can see them standing in your office or in the vents beside you, throw that sucker on. You can't leave it on too long though, as you cannot use the flashlight or music box while wearing it, despite what the teaser may lead you to believe. With all that being said, this game is fantastic. For the first time in the series, an actual connected narrative began forming, revolving around an incident happening in 1987 that gets this restaurant shut down, and forcing the owners to reopen a smaller location, which would be FNaF 1. This game also clued us into the puppet having an odd role in bringing the kids' spirits to life inside the withered animatronics, and even gave us our first ever glimpse of the killer, the purple guy. This was actually a name given by Markiplier of all people, who consistently gave fan names to characters that just kinda stuck. This includes Golden Freddy actually, so thanks Mark, you're responsible for my hell. The purple guy ends up killing 5 kids that the puppet would help possess the animatronics, but he also killed the kid inside the puppet, and what do you know, even more f***ing kids. This guy is just a menace, isn't he? FNaF 2 for the longest time was my favorite game in the series. I remember thinking it was easier overall than the first game, and it was actually my first time beating a max mode for any of the games. I did it on the bus ride from school on my phone. Nowadays, I definitely see more cracks in it than I used to, but it's still a great game overall. The flaws it has mostly comes down to the RNG not being great, we'll say. You can oftentimes get completely screwed over in a night, not because of any fault of your own, but because Foxy decided to attack in the time span it takes you to deal with several animatronics at once. leaving you no time to do the music box, and also Balloon Boy is here now. Frustrating. But in the end, I still consider FNaF 2 to be the perfect sequel to FNaF 1, and by that I mean the next game, not the sequel within the timeline. Actually, that's our next game, FNaF 3. Five Nights at Freddy's 3 is a huge game for the series in many ways. In fact, I'd say it's the single most important game of the original 3. This was the game that established it as a mainstay series, something content creators could look forward to make Let's Plays, and fans could look forward to unravel more and more of the ever-growing mystery Scott Cawthon was creating. This game is set 30 years after the first game, with the Fazbear brand having become pretty much extinct at this point. Your job is actually as a security guard for a horror attraction based on the rumors and stories of the original restaurant. It was a unique spin, putting us not in an active pizzeria, but essentially a haunted house, and our main antagonist was definitely a strange one. This is Springtrap. Shake hands because you're stuck with him forever now. The whole plot behind FNaF 3 from a meta standpoint is figuring out just what the heck Springtrap actually is, and why is he here? We've never seen a golden Bonnie character before, and is that a dead body inside of him? This game also gave us 2 different endings, which that's cool. Do either of them mean anything? I don't know, quit asking. Once again, we don't have any power or any doors, but now we don't even have a mask. So how do we protect ourselves? And from who? Well, our main threat of the game is Springtrap, who is active from night 2 onward. No, there is no threat on night 1, you can literally do nothing and win. It is the single worst night of a FNaF game because you aren't actually playing a game. Anyway, with Springtrap in the building, he'll slowly be making his way towards you, but how he does so will definitely be interesting. He'll oftentimes aim for rooms with ventilation shafts, most of which accelerate his pace greatly. Some of them even lead to right outside your door. If he gets through any of these, you're in bad shape. So in order to prevent Springtrap from using these vent highways, you can seal them up if you think he's going to try to use one, or if you see him inside it. The other way Springtrap moves will be from room to room. You can't prevent him from moving, but you can encourage that he moves a specific direction. By playing a sound cue in a room, he'll often be dragged over there. The chance of this happening is at first pretty high, but by night 5 it's actually fairly slim. Aside from dealing with Springtrap in this way, the other biggest threat is your own equipment. Regularly, you'll need to restart your cameras, audio lure, or even ventilation. You do not want ventilation to go out for very long because Springtrap actually speeds up when ventilation is failing. On top of that, you can see multiple fake illusory Springtraps on the camera system. Keeping all of this in check makes for a challenging, if simple to understand, gameplay loop. But it's the other guys that make this more difficult. Randomly during the night, you'll likely encounter phantom animatronics. This includes Phantom Freddy, Foxy, Mangle, Chica, Balloon Boy, and the Puppet. Phantom Bonnie does not exist, so quit asking. Anyway, these phantoms all have different triggers, but they all do basically the same thing. If you manage to get jump scared by them, they'll knock out ventilation. The exceptions to this are Mangle and Puppet. Mangle will make a loud noise that lures Springtrap closer to you, and Puppet will obscure your view and prevent you from checking your maintenance panel or the cameras. In either case, these two are pretty rough to encounter. The Phantoms end up making this game have way more jump scares than a typical FNaF game, and this was something critics really latched onto, calling it a jump scare factory and denouncing it for being so cheap with its horror. I honestly disagree. I think without the Phantoms, FNaF 3 would get really old really quickly, so I'm actually glad they're here. In terms of narrative, FNaF 3 is literally all about that. The game tells us what happened to the purple guy established in Five Nights at Freddy's 2. As we find out, he went back to the restaurant after Freddy's closed, dismantled the animatronics, and was then forced into a Springlock Bonnie suit. Likely the same suit he wore to commit the murders in the first place. That Springtrap guy we've been going up against this whole time, that's him. The result of faulty technology pushing a metal endoskeleton into its human wearer. Since his death, he's been locked away, only unearthed now to be a part of the horror attraction. In both endings of FNaF 3, the building actually burns down, with Springtrap surviving the fire. But the difference between those two endings comes down to what happens to the spirits of the 5 missing kids. In one ending, after completing a series of minigames, you can set them free. In the other, however, their souls are still clinging on and remain restless. All these years later, and it's still not quite clear which of these two endings is the true canon ending. It mostly comes down to what you believe. I've gone 3 games so far without talking about theories, and that was sort of intentional. The theorizing community was really only budding at this point in time. Like, there were only 5 total game theory videos during this era. Compare that to the modern day, with 102 at the time of this recording. The FNaF theory sphere has a long and complex history, so I'm probably just going to name some of the theories I thought were really interesting from around this time. For example, Fungi is Purple Guy. This mostly just comes down to the fact that Phone Guy is the only other human character from these games at this point in time, and he does seem to know a lot about what happened at Freddy's, while still acting overall protective of the brand itself. So I guess it came down to the question of, is he just working a 9 to 5 or did he kill some children? The theorist community would only grow from this point on, and in really interesting ways, especially with the release of the next game, Five Nights at Freddy's 4. By the way, if you guys want to see me talk more about the history of FNaF theorizing, let me know in the comments down below. That's a video I've actually considered making in the past, but I don't know if people would actually want to watch it. Anyway, FNaF 4. This game took things in an entirely new and interesting direction, pulling the player out of the office and into the bedroom. You play as and your job is to keep nightmarish animatronics out of your bedroom. The format is most similar to FNaF 1, but with some gameplay changes that come from FNaF 2 and 3. For example, Freddy sort of inherits a puppet-like role, requiring you to constantly tend to him in the same spot every night. While Foxy is much the same, you can actually prevent him from ever entering your room. The same can't be said for Freddy. The thing that makes FNaF 4 one of the most special FNaF games from a gameplay standpoint is just how terrifying it actually is to play. Let me put it this way, horror is my life. I watch horror movies, play horror games, I consume a lot of horror media, and in a way I've been desensitized to it. But FNaF 4 still to this day is one of the scariest games I've ever played. Let me explain. Your main objective is going to be either one of the two doors on your left and right side. As the night continues, Bonnie and Chica will appear here. Go to the door and shine your light in order to scare them off if they're down the hall. However, this is where the game gets scary, because sometimes they won't be down the hall, but they'll be in your face. When this happens, you need to shut the door on them. But how do you know if they're at the door or down the hall? You listen for their breathing. It doesn't sound like actual breathing, more of a cartoon swoosh sound, but it's noticeable, if subtle. If you hear that sound, shut the door. Now, veteran FNaF 4 players know that there's a couple other ways than just that noise to tell when you're in imminent danger. Notably, you can hear them move around while you're in your bedroom, and since audio is directional in this game, you'll be able to hear which side the footsteps are approaching from. This is, in my opinion, the absolute best use of audio in the entire series, and the primary reason the game is so scary. Rather than actually seeing the nightmares for much of the game, we instead see a bare, plain house. It's only after you start making mistakes that you see these monsters up close. Freddy and Foxy's mechanics are different than Bonnie and Chica. Freddy is always under your bed. As the night continues and you don't check on it, more and more of these tiny Freddles will appear on the bed. Shine your light on these baby Freddys to scare the big one off. Foxy, however, is definitely a more pressing threat. Foxy will start appearing in the same locations as Bonnie and Chica, however he moves quicker between his stages. This is because he doesn't actually attack you when he gets to your door. If you let Foxy in, instead he'll go for your closet. Once inside, he'll slowly grow more aggressive. You have to keep the closet shut on him in order to keep him calm and revert him to a plush toy. At this point, he's basically the same deal as Freddy. You need to check on him from time to time in between dealing with Bonnie and Chica. However, all of this is thrown out on night 5. On this night, there's only one animatronic active, Fredbear. He takes properties from every previous character except one. You don't ever really have to listen for him at the doors. You can shine your light on him and still get him. Because of this, night 5 ends up being a little easier than night 4 since you only have one threat to keep track of, even if he is basically a harder version of all the previous characters. In between nights as well, there's a minigame, Fun with Plush Trap. During this minigame, Plush Trap will move towards you slowly. You have to try to get him to move onto the white X in front of you without time running out or Plush Trap jump scaring you. The reward for this is a time skip in the next night, which definitely helps since the night is overall shorter, but the animatronics aggression patterns still start at their default. You basically get an easier, shorter version of every night. The reward is great, but the minigame itself I just think is kind of boring. Like, it's scary your first time through, but it's not really much of an interactive experience. You once again use your ears to tell where Plush Trap is as he moves closer to you, but it's nowhere near as fun as the breathing at the doors. So far, this game has been absolutely one of the best FNaF experiences, so what holds it back? FNaF 4 typically isn't looked at with the favor of the first 3 games, so why is this the case? Well, it comes down to the story. That being, we still have no idea what it is. A rule of thumb I follow when it comes to FNaF theorists is not to trust anyone who thinks they actually know what FNaF 4 is. because this game has been changed so many times in the past that what it was and what it is now are almost certainly different. To briefly explain what FNaF 4 was at the time, we play as a child experiencing nightmares after witnessing something happen at either Freddy Fazbear's Pizza or Fredbear's Family Diner. During the day, we played these 8-bit minigames documenting the crying child's life and ultimately his death in the jaws of Fredbear. Since then, it's been unclear what this game means in the grand scheme of the series, or what events in it are relevant. As its own microcosm, I think FNaF 4 is an interesting and sad story, but when linked up with Sister Location down the line, it becomes more complicated. As for where it is now, it's still hotly debated, but the most likely answer at the moment is that the nightmare animatronics were real animatronics. Sort of. It's likely that the crying child's nightmares were the results of a hallucinatory gas being pumped into his room, witnessing mannequins come to life as the nightmares. I wouldn't say this fully lines up with what happens in FNaF 4, but at the moment it seems to be the most likely answer, considering the same thing happens to a character named Rory in the most recent book series. For a while, there was also the belief that Michael Afton was the one having the nightmares, since he knows what Nightmare Fredbear looks like in the survival logbook, specifically when asked about what his dreams have been like lately. But this kind of falls apart when you realize that even Silver Parasol in-universe knows what all the nightmares look like. I think at the moment, FNaF 4's gameplay sections are still vastly unexplained, and the explanations we do have all have their own flaws, weaknesses, and most of all are not satisfying. In a perfect world, FNaF 4 would be just as it presents itself. Nightmares. But the truth is that this game has been retread so many times that looking back at it is hard. Scott was too vague with what he wanted to communicate here, and he had to go back and fix it. But before Sister Location sort of righted the ship, we had two big releases. The first was the Silverized, the first Five Nights at Freddy's novel, which I'll definitely be talking about after we get through the games. The second one came 1 month later in January of 2016. FNaF World. FNaF World is such an oddball of a game within the FNaF franchise, and it's probably the only spin-off game to receive a vitriolically negative reaction upon its release. But I have a confession. I am not an expert on FNaF World. I've only received a handful of endings. I don't know the optimal parties or strategies, and I'm woefully unqualified to tell you much about the gameplay loop. So I got someone who is extremely qualified. If you haven't heard of this guy, this is David Barron. He's a streamer and video maker friend of mine, and he knows FNaF World better than probably anyone. So I've invited him to explain the gameplay of FNaF World as well as give his own opinions on the game.
FNaF World at its core is an extremely simple RPG type game, where Fredbear informs you that Robot Town is under attack from some unseen force, and only you can stop it. So you gather your squad by fighting characters to recruit them, progressively building your team's power until you can take on the final boss, being Scott Cawthon himself, or security if you're a baby loser who sucks at video games. There's a total of 48 characters you can unlock, majority of which you unlock by just wandering the overworld. But there's a handful at the bottom that were added later in the spooky update, where you gotta beat some minigames ranging far in difficulty. These characters are broken, to say the least, some possessing Scott's very own boss move, the fourth wall, and others with similar, or even more strength. Each character has a set of 3 moves, and the power difference between them is staggering. Characters like Bonnie and Chica are decently powerful for most of the game, and will definitely save your ass more than you could imagine. Then on the stronger side, we have Spring Bonnie. Oh my god, what kind of cotton candy flavored crack did they give this guy? These moves are insane! And then far on the other side of the spectrum, the Phantoms. I'm so sorry, my sweet, sweet summer children. I'm sorry your parents didn't love you. When this game first released, people didn't like it, which made me sad because I fucking love it! It was the perfect steer away from the grade A spookums delivered to us with FNaF 4, and I was all for the fun, goofy aesthetic it presented itself with. So I've played through it a ton of times by now, quite a few times recently for different challenge runs, such as my top row only or randomized speedrun videos. To pull off these challenges, you gotta play things decently optimally and understand how each aspect of the game works, and while there are some more interesting mechanics to play around, like when to use your power boost for certain attacks, or what moves to use at certain times, a lot of it boils down to praying for RNG. A lot of RNG. But not all hope is lost, because of bites and chips that you can gather around the map which significantly boost your chances in any fight. Ranging from extra damage, healing, armor bonuses, big fuck-off shield, tiny fuck-off mimic, not that one, making bosses go boom, and a host of other wonderful toys. No, don't tell anyone I told you this, but if you want the pro strat for your FNaF worlding, that auto shield chip with the auto mimic chip, and a dash of constant speed and defense, and a quick slide of some auto gift boxes are quite the treat, I will say. But shh, you didn't hear that from me. Now let's talk about the real meat of combat in FNaF World, the enemies themselves, and the bosses. Right out of the gate, when starting, you get hit with basic Fazbear Hills enemies, and they are nothing. Easy pickings. Just slap some smoking hot cheese on their asses and they melt away. And the auto shipper soon after isn't much different. Just make sure to heal. Good God, people, remember to heal. Chica is right there, and those cupcakes are delicious. As you get farther into the game, you'll run into stronger and stronger foes to overcome, until you inevitably enter what I call the Dark Souls chapter, where you have to fight 5 bosses back to back almost. Bubba, Pork Patch, Snowcone, Overclock, and Super Goon. Each of them pose a different challenge. Bubba and Pork Patch are just heavy hitters with a fair amount of health. Overclock attacks rapidly, but with some pretty average damage, so whatever. Snowcone is just bullet hell, so a shield is a must. And then there's Super Goon, the hellish creature that lives in the bottom of Lilygear Lake. There's been stories spread amongst FNaF World enthusiasts. Legends of an 8-tentacled being who resides deep in the far corner of the lake, guarding the final button to security. Super Goon is easily the hardest boss out of this rush, an actual nightmare to face. It's got a fast attack speed, a shit ton of health, and freaky high damage. I can confidently say that Super Goon is the bane of any FNaF World player's existence. Besides a Chica minigame. We don't talk about the Chica minigame. Then we arrive at the final bosses. Security is a pushover. Just equip shield or have Endo O2 if you're a cheeky little bitch, and slowly whittle down his health to nothing. And then there's the Scott fight, which is just peak all over. Every corner of it has peak scribbled in red marker, with peak scribbled in between the giant P. It's beautiful. And a godsend banger just improves it overall. To wrap things up, FNaF World is awesome, and I refuse to hear arguments in the comments. I see you writing that shit. Yeah, press the backspace button. Hold it. Okay, there. Better.
FNaF World ended up teasing us to Sister Location, which was an absolutely huge release. I mean, Moldy Bread at half the price would have probably been bigger than FNaF World, but Sister Location was something else. The series had its groove again. It was flashy, interesting, and story-driven, and this, in my opinion, was the real beginning of the end. I should clarify, some time ago I made a video voicing my distaste for Sister Location, and while not a lot has changed, I think I overall have lightened up on it. I still think it suffers in some very unique ways, but I wouldn't say it's terrible. The problem with Sister Location is that you only really need one playthrough to get it, and then another to get footage for this video. So what is there to say about Sister Location? Well, it's bad, but interesting. Sister Location takes place in an underground bunker that houses animatronics to be rented out for birthday parties, owned by William Afton, who at this point had been established to be the purple guy first seen in FNaF II. These new robots are more sci-fi than in previous games, and the star of the show is Circus Baby, an animatronic that guides you throughout the game as part of her evil master plan to escape the bunker. The main difference between this game and previous games in the series is that Sister Location is a much more narrative experience. Your time spent here isn't going to be focused on the tight gameplay from previous games, but more individual, bite-sized experiences that help paint the location more clearly. In a lot of ways, this was the beginning of the end, but I don't think it was necessarily a bad direction for the series. Plenty of series shift their focus to story in lieu of gameplay, like every f***ing Sonic game after 06. But for FNaF in specific, this may have been an incredibly damaging move since that narrative wasn't received as well as it could have been. To sum up my thoughts on Sister Location's story, basically you could put it at the beginning of the timeline at that point or the very end, or remove it entirely and basically nothing changes. It's a self-contained story, but that doesn't mean it's a good one, because no one is allowed to know anything about the person they play as in these games. Mike as a character is as hollow as they come, which means moments like the ending don't really affect the player, at least not on the level that they could. But the real big problem with Sister Location's story is trying to figure out what the game is actually telling us about the larger series. But the problem is it really doesn't seem to be. Does it directly connect to any game? Kind of with FNaF 4, but otherwise no. When does it take place? Who knows? What plot points have happened in the story thus far? Couldn't say. Sister Location is an anomaly of a story that fails at being self-contained because it doesn't really mean anything unless it's connected to other games in the series. The most sister location can really be otherwise is just that one weird game where Night 4 is actually impossible. That seems as good a branching point as any to talk about the gameplay, so let's talk. Sister location's gameplay is split up in different sections, each with their own mechanics. Most are survival oriented and range from the extremely easy to the extremely hard, with some middle ground here or there. I'll say it straight up, I beat Night 4 once and I don't intend on doing it again, so I just skipped that night entirely. On Night 1 you're introduced to the place and animatronics. No real worries here, and it does establish the bunker. The bunker itself I think is a really cool and unique location that plays into Scott Cawthon's strengths. At that point he had been operating outside of his comfort zone for a long time, since he was primarily interested in creating sci-fi experiences before horror. I don't actually mind the change in tone this game has in comparison to the previous titles, since Scott does such a good job with it. No matter what critiques I have over gameplay or story, Sister Location has a fantastic setting. Night 2 has Mike traversing more dangerous sections of the bunker, getting attacked by Bidybabs as well as Ballora and Funtime Freddy. Night 3 once again gives us Funtime Freddy, but now also Funtime Foxy. This night always ends in a jump scare that moves us into Night 4, where Mike is put in a Springlock suit. Mini-Renas attempt to crawl to your face to kill you, but you have to shake them down while keeping the Springlocks bound. This is not fun. Night 5 is simple, but there's two versions of it. If at any point you died in the previous nights, you have a chance of playing a minigame where Circus Baby feeds kids ice cream. Feed them in the correct order so that every kid is fed, and you'll be able to go back to the start and give a little girl ice cream, before scooping her up and killing her. This will unlock the secret ending, but the normal ending has you walk blindly in a scooper room and get got. The secret ending reveals that the animatronics have bound together into one form, Ennard, which tries to kill you. Live until 6 AM and you get a non-canon cutscene as your prize. Amazing job, everyone. This game is nothing. It actually feels like the video game equivalent of that one scene in Baki where they eat food made of nothing. I know people will want me to say more about Sister Location than how I just don't like it, but you can't convince me this game is good. The best compliment I can give, however, is it sort of tied the community together again. Maybe it doesn't appeal to me, but it appealed to enough people to sort of reinvigorate the series again. A much needed revival since the release of FNaF World left many creators disappointed. Without Sister Location, I don't think we would have gotten the next game, which is another one I'm not a fan of actually. So I'm gonna pass this one off to my good buddy Postra to give his takes on Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator.
Pizza Sim. Oh boy, Pizza Sim. The game that people remember for having the best ending in the series, a convoluted minigame that nobody can agree on, and not much else. Okay, all jokes aside, something I find very interesting about Pizzeria Simulator is how insanely polarizing this game is to FNaF fans. You either love it for what it did for the story and how unique and inventive it was, or you hate it for many of the glaring flaws it has. I am absolutely in the ballpark of people who love this game, thinking the things it did for the series are well worth the issues it has. And the main reason I love it can be seen the moment we open it for the first time. Now, in modern day, the secret about this game's true nature is well known to practically every FNaF fan. But when it first released, the way this game opened was one of the most shocking and exciting moments from any fandom I was a part of. When we open the game, we are first greeted to this goofy little arcade screen where we build pizzas and throw them at kids. And that's about it. This version of the game was what we saw on all the previews for it and teasers. So when we played it back on release day, this was all the game made itself out to be. But then, suddenly, everything begins to bug out, and before we know it, we are greeted to the game's true colors. This opening tells you everything you need to know about Pizza Sim. It is a goofy, lighthearted tycoon game by day, and a spooky, terrifying, traditional FNaF game by night. Actually getting into the way this game properly plays, Pizza Sim's first segment, the tycoon phase, is easily the best part of this game in my opinion. This section is exactly what you signed up for if you downloaded it without any prior knowledge about what it was really about. Here we are the owner of a pizzeria trying our hardest to bring in new customers and turn a profit. How do we do that, you ask? Well, by buying some random minigames and robots, playing said minigames, and somehow earning money from that, of course. The minigames and earning money to upgrade your pizzeria is without a doubt the most enjoyable part of this game. There is something so incredibly satisfying about using up as many play tokens as you can, trying your hardest to perfect a minigame of your choice to get the highest score possible, and then finally succeeding to see all those bright lights and colors pop up all over your screen telling you how much money you've won. Or, if you're anything like me, you can throw skill out the window and use all 10 of your minigame play tokens you're given to sit and gamble the whole day to try and win Music Man. Regardless of how you go about it, the Tycoon section is insanely fun. The minigames are great and have some of the goofiest comedy in the game, like Helpy breaking his neck every time you fail to land in the ball pit. Building your pizzeria is really satisfying, what with making it larger to accommodate more customers and buying cooler animatronics to sit on stage. And all around, it is a nice breath of fresh air for this series. But all that being said, eventually, you do run out of stuff to do during this part of the game. You run out of money to spend, and you run out of play tokens to earn more. And that leaves you with only one option: to close for the day and move into our office gameplay. The office section of Pizzeria Simulator is most definitely the weakest aspect of this game. While this segment does replicate the classic FNaF formula in a way that is very scary the first time you play it, once you get a handle on how it works, you slowly begin to realize how half-baked practically the entire thing is. Let me give you the rundown. Basically, during this section, you are forced to fend off any and all animatronics that get into your building during a segment we have yet to discuss, all the while completing a list of tasks before you can leave. There is no survive till 6 a.m. this time. Finishing the night is entirely dependent on you. While you do these tasks, the animatronics will crawl through the vents on the left and right and try to make their way towards you, with there being several ways you can fend them off. You can use audio lures, you can shine your light into the vents, you can disable the fan to minimize the noise you make, etc., etc. And see, the main issue with this section of gameplay comes from those methods of defense. Because the thing is, none of these methods of defense are properly explained to you, nor do any of them always work. You have to figure everything out for yourself, and once you do, you realize that nothing you have at your disposal is reliable. On one hand, this aspect of the gameplay makes the game very scary the first time you play it. You never feel safe and you're always terrified of the prospect that whatever you do won't be enough to survive. On the other hand, this gameplay loop becomes very frustrating once you get the hang of it, because very rarely does it reward you for using your tools correctly. You could play perfectly the entire night and just get killed for it because one of the 4 present threats decided you need to die. And when you aren't scared anymore, that is genuinely infuriating. Which sucks because conceptually, I adore this part of the game. Despite all my complaints, there is no denying that the first time you play this game, these nights are terrifying. The idea of being trapped in this dingy office space surrounded by monsters you can hear but cannot see is wonderful in contrast to the more lighthearted Tycoon section. And it makes this section cool to play to me, despite the glaring flaws it does have. Once you get to the end of this section, you log out for the day and get ready for the beginning of your next Tycoon cycle. Or at least that's what you'd think, because instead you are greeted to this, the salvage section. This is the third and final segment of gameplay in Pizza Sim, and it is certainly an interesting one. Here you are given the choice to either salvage the horrifying robotic abomination in front of you for a massive payout, allowing it to enter your restaurant and torment you during the office segment, or you can throw it outside, foregoing any profit but making the overall experience easier. This section adds a fun little dynamic to the game, adding a level of risk and reward to the whole thing. On one hand, you are making the tycoon phase easier for yourself, with the added profits making it way easier to build up your pizzeria. But on the other hand, the added animatronics during the office phase do make things a hell of a lot harder. So you have to think a lot about what you want to do here. And that's not even mentioning the fact that there is straight up a chance that when you choose to keep one of these animatronics, they may kill you and you won't get any money at all. Playing this section is like a scary game of tug of war between you and the animatronic. You have to sit there and listen to these spooky audio cues, marking down if there's any odd behavior, and if at any point you notice the animatronic move, you have to tase it to stop it from killing you. This sounds simple enough, but later down the line with characters like Scrap Baby and Lefty, the movements for them become so subtle you may not even notice they'd moved until it is way too late and you end up losing all potential profits. Now, if you're anything like me, you may just end up skipping this section by throwing them away, because quite frankly, I don't want to deal with these robots trying to kill me even for the money. But many people do, for the simple reason that you need to complete all of these salvage sections to get the game's true ending, which is the main reason why most people play the game in the first place. And speaking of that ending, I feel that no discussion of this game is really complete without a small discussion about the lore, so let's get to that. So what is the story of Pizzeria Simulator? Why have we, the player, taken up this job? Why do we feel the need to salvage giant murder machines and let them loose in our restaurant? Well, we get the answer to that at the very end of the game, where it is finally revealed that the pizzeria we were building this whole time was actually a trap. A trap for the 4 animatronics we salvaged through the minigames. A trap constructed by the business partner of William Afton, Henry Emily. With all of them in one place, the entire building burns with you and Henry still inside, finally bringing an end to the horrors committed at Freddy's. Outside of a few convoluted minigames that I do not want to even get into, that description is essentially what the entire story of Pizzeria Sim boils down to. It is a whole lot more simple than the games prior, and honestly, I kind of love it for that. I really appreciate the fact that Pizzeria Sim tried its best here to be a game that wrapped up all the loose ends that were left, bringing them all into one place so they may see the end of their stories together. It's no wonder this moment is the one the game is most famous for. This little bit of lore and the final cutscene tied to it are powerful stuff. And even if the rest of the game wasn't there, it would still be one of the most beloved moments in the entire franchise. And that is Pizzeria Simulator, a flawed game that I still feel earned its place as being the proper finale to the FNaF story. It was an innovative game that mixed together both familiar concepts and new alike, all brought together by a powerful narrative about moving on and allowing the dead to finally rest. I am so glad this game gave the series the ending it deserved, and I respect the hell out of Scott for never making another sequel after. With all the monies the series made, you would expect for him to want to keep it going, but he decided that the story was perfect as it was and didn't. Okay, you know what, the joke is over. I'm not fooling you. You've seen how much the video is left. Let's just move on.
After Pizza Sim, we had a definitive ending to the series, but Scott Cawthon wasn't done. He needed to go further and give the series gameplay like it had never experienced before. This led to Ultimate Custom Night, 50 animatronics, a ton of ways to fend for yourself, and the most impossible challenge in series history. Let me set the stage. After Pizza Sim, the FNaF series was effectively over, but for some, Pizza Sim was just not a good note to end on from a gameplay standpoint. It had been a very long time relatively since the classic office gameplay of FNaF 1 through 3. Ultimate Custom Night ended up being exactly that. More classic office stuff, now with the addition of an all-star lineup from throughout the FNaF series. You know what, this video is long enough as it is. I'm going to list all 50 characters present on the starting screen of Ultimate Custom Night. Freddy Fazbear, Bonnie, Chica, Foxy, Toy Freddy, Toy Bonnie, Toy Chica, Mangle, Balloon Boy, JJ, Withered Chica, Withered Bonnie, The Puppet, Golden Freddy, Springtrap, Phantom Mangle, Phantom Freddy, Phantom Balloon Boy, Nightmare Freddy, Nightmare Bonnie, Nightmare Fredbear, Nightmare, Jacko Chica, Nightmare Mangle, Nightmarian, Nightmare Balloon Boy, Old Man Consequences, Circus Baby, Ballora, Funtime Foxy, Ennard, Trash in the Gang, Helpy, F***ass Frog, Mr. Hippo, Pig Patch, Ned Bear, Orville the Elephant, Rockstar Freddy, Rockstar Bonnie, Rockstar Chica, Rockstar Foxy, Music Man, El Chip, Funtime Chica, Molten Freddy, Scrap Baby, Scrap Trap, Lefty, and Phone Guy. Now, there were some odd omissions here or there, like Withered Freddy or Funtime Freddy, but still most of the characters who you want to be here are here. So how does the game play? Like shit, it plays like shit. I can't be the only one who just does not find Ultimate Custom Night all that enjoyable. Nearly every animatronic has their own unique way of dealing with them, and having to keep track of all of them is just kinda stressful in a not so fun way. Let's look back at FNaF 2. Even though there were so many threats, you dealt with most of them the same way, the Freddy mask. This made characters who weren't repelled by the mask feel more special, but further it also meant that the learning curve wasn't about which defense to use, it was about timing that defense, and learning what to expect, the trade between music box time or flashlighting the hall or wearing the mask. I feel like UCN tried to recapture that panic from FNaF 2, but it ultimately just felt more like a bunch of random shit thrown together. On top of that, UCN is infamous for the worst jump scares in the series, most of which are just shaking PNGs without animation. And I mean, fine, Scott didn't have to make 50 new jump scares, but I do think he could have at least reused the jump scares he already made. I don't care if the lighting would look off or not, but Withered Chica deserves better. But the real story behind UCN's success isn't really tied to whether or not the game was fun. It was a matter of could it even be done? That brings us to Dako, who was a steadily growing content creator in the FNaF sphere at the time, and one of the few creators who sort of had an ongoing professional relationship with Scott Cawthon. Dako and Scott ended up entering a sort of challenge. If Dako could beat 50-20 mode, the hardest mode in the game, Scott would finally give the public something they had wanted for a long time. An interview with the man who made the story they'd been following for so long. If Dako failed, however, he'd have to head a fan game praising Scott and his work. The point was that no matter who won the challenge, it would be fun for the community. So how did it go? Well, Dako had a very rough going of it at first, as to be expected. It's worth noting that Dako, for all intents and purposes, was probably the ideal candidate for this challenge, even if he didn't have the most prolific history of challenge runs or anything like that. In many ways, if Dako could beat it, the average FNaF fan might be able to do it too. What separated Dako from many other creators in the sphere at the time was how solely dedicated he was to the series, famously dropping out of law school to pursue his online career once his FNaF content started taking off. So, what happened? Well, he won. This win was a monumental moment in the series' history and cemented Dako as one of, if not the most important, Five Nights at Freddy's content creator ever. Seriously, this opened Dako up to later create the FNaF show interviewing others who worked on the games, and definitely skyrocketed his popularity significantly. And it led the public to hear how many times Scott Cawthon says "you know" when talking to someone. He says it a lot, you know. And I do think that this whole event, if you want to call it that, was the single most important thing to come out of UCN. It purposely lacked a story, and anything it did have resembling one was purposely left vague and almost completely uninterpretable. The most we could surmise was that we were playing as William Afton, experiencing his punishment in quote-unquote hell after the events of Pizza Sim. Or maybe not even hell, but just a world created by Golden Freddy to trap William's spirit in, fighting endless waves of his own monsters. It was a fitting end for such a villainous character, but as I'm sure you know, this wasn't really the end. Not the end of the series, and arguably not the end of Afton. And that brings us to FNaF Help Wanted, the first game in what I'd like to call the reboot era of FNaF, which is basically the modern era. The reason I think of it as the reboot era is because Help Wanted purposely divorces itself from pretty much every game previously in the series, and even lightly implies they may have been fictitious retellings of what really happened. That's not to say the older games aren't canon anymore, because they definitely are, but it does mean that the new story is going to be less involved with the events we know about and spend more time showing us new ones. Basically, this game establishes the previous series as one full and complete package that is separate from what Help Wanted Forward will be doing. This is also probably the longest game in the series yet, with 3 sets of 5 full nights spanning the first 3 games in the series, as well as an assortment of minigames based on the rest, with the primary exceptions being a lack of any UCN content or Pizza Sim content aside from Helpy's presence. Oh, and also Sister Location is pretty lacking as well, but being fair, I don't know how much really could be done to make Sister Location work in a VR format. Anyway, what are my opinions on Help Wanted? Well, if I had to put it bluntly, this game is bad, but it's a great step in the right direction. Let me explain. Help Wanted is a game that is meant to reflect the series' past while looking forward to the future, but it spends way too much time focusing on the past without improving upon it. Basically, nothing that's recreated in Help Wanted is better in Help Wanted. If you want to play FNaF 2, play FNaF 2. If you want to play FNaF 1, play FNaF 1. None of the 3 remakes in this game surpass the quality of their original versions. And while it's cool to experience them in VR, the novelty kinda wears off after a bit, I think. And don't ever bother playing the flat mode version of the game. This version actually just makes the whole experience feel like a Roblox ripoff or something. So FNaF 1, 2, and 3 are all pretty much duds if you ask me. FNaF 2 especially. When I first played Help Wanted, this was my favorite game in the series, and seeing it so poorly recreated actually disappointed me heavily. For starters, up until the hard mode night, the only withered animatronic in the game is Foxy, with the rest not even being active at all during the main course of the game. While this does put a spotlight on the toy animatronics, which is neat, it just makes the whole experience feel wrong. Playing FNaF 2, the withereds do gradually overshadow the toys, which I think actually allows the game to become scarier the longer you play, because they're scarier threats to deal with, who lack the obvious tells of their toy counterparts. But in the Help Wanted remake, their absence means the tension never really rises past what the toys can bring, and frankly, that's not a whole lot. It also means the game never feels like it's getting any harder, even if technically it is. FNaF 3 is the only one of these remakes that I feel like there's a case to be made for playing this one in VR. Unlike the previous 2 recreations, this one actually feels like you're in a genuine building, probably because of the emphasis on depth with the hall in front of you and vent beside you. Plus, seeing Springtrap crawling in the vent is really cool, even if he looks like a ripoff of himself named Sprungtap. But the remakes are actually just one part of Help Wanted's whole deal. Inside are various minigames that don't adhere to the Five Nights formula, and instead either remakes existing minigames from the series or just make their own new ones. I think the highlight has to be the repair sections, where you have to repair a giant stationary animatronic in the correct way to avoid getting a jump scare. It's one of the few moments in the game where these robots come off as genuinely really creepy, and not just pale imitations of what we're used to seeing. Then there's vent repair, and I have to say, a lot scarier your first time than any other time. There's Plush Trap, Nightmare Baby, all of that fun stuff. I think the back half of Help Wanted's gameplay can be fully summed up as not bad, but why bother? With the standout good segments of the game being those animatronic repair minigames. Those are fun regardless. But there's been something I left out of the discussion so far. The story, because as much as Help Wanted is really a minigame compilation and remake collection, I'd be remiss if I didn't explain how it pushes the FNaF series forward. This is Glitchtrap, you might have heard of him. Basically, this game is, in universe, a VR game that's being tested by you, the player. Silver Parasol Games picked up Help Wanted after the previous game company called it quits for unknown reasons. While playing, you'll be able to collect hidden tapes that help you piece together just what went wrong with the development of this game. Circuit boards provided by a party were scanned into the game in order to program in animatronic pathfinding using real circuitry from Freddy's. Instead, this character appeared, a yellow rabbit suit wearing manifestation that's dubbed Glitchtrap. Or Malhair if you want to be a contrarian. This character seems to have a specific goal in mind, that being escaping the VR world. After the previous playtester, Jeremy, is disposed of when he cut his own face off after seeing Glitchtrap, we seem to be the next person in line. Tape Girl instructs us on how we can delete him permanently, but there is no good ending to the story. Either our minds merge with Glitchtrap or we're locked away permanently while he escapes. A lot of theories went into figuring out just who Glitchtrap was, and while I've been avoiding theories for a bit now, I want to talk about the obvious. For most people, this had to be William Afton coming back from the dead as a ghost in the machine, now looking to rejoin reality through someone else's body. However, the more likely option in my mind is one that MatPat actually called pretty much immediately. MatPat didn't believe Glitchtrap was William, but was instead an AI copying William, mimicking him, one might say. And that word is so important to the new story, just you wait. There's also the Curse of Dreadbear DLC, a nice addition to Help Wanted that many consider better than the base game. That said, it remains the one piece of the main FNaF series I have not played myself, so I don't really feel comfortable talking about it. Instead, I'm going to recommend my friend Pastra's video covering this DLC, since he's probably the only person I know who still gives a damn about it. From a lore standpoint, this was also how we found out about Vanny as a character, and who we play as in Help Wanted, Vanessa. Kind of. Well, we found out our character would be a future villain, pretty much. Next up is FNaF AR, a game I actually can't get any new footage for because it's no longer being supported. So let me just cover what my previous thoughts were. FNaF AR was a hop onto the trend started by Pokemon Go, that being AR mobile experiences that encourage you to explore and actually go outside. That being said, I don't recommend playing this game in public because you will look like a lunatic. FNaF AR puts you in the shoes of someone who has joined a service meant to send animatronics to your location for parties, or just for fun, I guess. However, the service has been corrupted by an unknown virus, most likely meant to be Glitchtrap. During this game, you'll be protecting yourself from random encounters with various FNaF animatronics, collecting remnant and sending out your own robots to mess with your friends. Something that, if this game is 100% canon to the story, is a horrifying concept. The gameplay of FNaF AR is incredibly simple. Basically, you just have to zap an animatronic when it tries to attack you. Keep track of it, be sure to crack it, and you win. You do have limited power, however, and this can oftentimes completely fuck you, so be aware of that. Oh, and the boundless microtransactions, gotta love those. Actually, no I don't, fuck you. I don't have much to say on FNaF AR, but it's actually relatively important in the grand scheme of the series, introducing us to all those fucking skins that make up like 50% of the entire character encyclopedia. If FNaF was a TV show, AR would be a dumbass filler episode that no one appreciates aside from the fact it's funny the show had any filler at all. Is it lore important? Kind of, not necessarily. Does it introduce anything that would be a staple of the series moving forward? No. AR is just weird, and I also already covered this game extensively in a previous video. I guess that brings us to Security Breach, and this game has been covered to death already, including by me. But let's talk about it anyway, because this game is what got me back into the franchise. Honestly, the hype surrounding this game pulled me, who was at the time a 19-year-old college student, absolutely crushed by the hopelessness of reality, into the series I grew up on again. And to be fair, I do think it sort of paid off. Security Breach was the most different game in the series history yet, and I was really interested in seeing how different it was and whether or not I would like it. And well, I really liked it, at first. Nowadays I'm a lot less patient with Security Breach than I once was, but I still don't think it was a bad game or a bad experience. It was different and not what I was expecting, but I still ultimately found it to be enjoyable. Let me give a rundown of what Security Breach is all about. After the events of Help Wanted, Freddy Fazbear's Mega Pizzaplex is created as a sort of full-on brand revival. This is the location of the game, and in it you play as Gregory, a mysterious boy who is locked in the Pizzaplex past closing. Throughout the game you'll be pursued by Vanny, the follower of Glitchtrap and presumably the player character of Help Wanted. On top of this, something has corrupted the various animatronics that now roam the Pizzaplex, looking for you. These new characters remix the old cast and add on to it with new ones. The Glamrock animatronics make up some of my favorite animatronics in the series. Although they're a lot less scary than most others throughout the series, they also get a lot more characterization than any of them previously. My favorite undoubtedly has to be Roxanne, the Foxy replacement whose corrupted code gives her a wildly narcissistic personality that covers up her actual self-esteem issues. She's the most off the wall of any of them in this game, and later on was the character Steel Wool would develop most heavily. Oh, that's another thing. Both Help Wanted and now Security Breach were developed by Steel Wool Studios. In fact, Security Breach was their first ever non-VR title. While Help Wanted isn't amazing, it was definitely at the very least okay, even if it didn't live up to the series it was paying homage to. Security Breach, on the other hand, was a very different beast. The launch was nothing short of a total disaster. This game, more than any other FNaF game so far, became known for its bugs, glitches, and softlocks. And while this led to the creation of an entire speedrunning community centered around the game, for the rest of us it was kind of painful. The version of Security Breach from way back when to now are almost two completely different games. The current version has had multiple cosmetic and graphical glow-ups, some quality of life improvements, and overall bug fixes that made the game really easy to cheese. For the sake of respecting Steel Wool, I'm going to be judging Security Breach off of its latest patch, which I think we can take as the definitive version of the game. This is what Steel Wool wanted the game to be like. It's hard to say where the trouble in Security Breach's development really started, but I think most of us can agree that the game wasn't ready to come out when it did. Anyway, what does Security Breach play like? Well, in it you play as Gregory, and your main mechanics in this game revolve around stealth and exploration. This usually means getting from point A to point B while completing an objective and not getting caught by one of 3 hostile animatronics. First up is Glamrock Chica. Her mechanic is probably the scariest in my opinion, being that if you're caught by one of the many security bots in the Pizzaplex, she'll immediately spawn behind you unless she's already in your line of sight. This sort of teleporting mechanic I think is probably an homage to Bonnie's mechanic from the first FNaF game, since he doesn't make an appearance here. Next is Roxy. Unlike Chica, when Roxy is alerted to your location, she will actually run there instead of teleport. However, her unique mechanic comes in the form of a lunge. If she's a good distance away, sometimes she'll get down and lunge towards you at a faster speed. This doesn't happen very often at first, but this mechanic becomes a crucial part of her boss battle later on in the game. Finally is Montgomery Gator. Monty's mechanic is the simplest to understand. Partway through the game you'll acquire either a Phaz camera or a Phaser blaster, both of which are weapons that will let you blind animatronics in your vicinity. Monty, however, is wearing sunglasses and is immune to the flash from either the blaster or camera. During gameplay, being chased by any of these 3 kinda meshes together, but looking back and seeing how they all behave somewhat differently is just kinda cool. But they aren't the only hostile enemies. There's also 5 special enemies I'd call: Vanny, the daycare attendant, Vanessa, the Blob, and Burntrap. I'd also throw in the Music Man variants and the Glamrock endos, but they're just not as interesting to talk about in my opinion. Vanny only appears a small number of times throughout the game, and what separates her from the Glamrocks is that she'll always know your location, meaning you can't hide from her and have to run away. She also makes the screen more gradually red and staticky the closer you are in proximity to her, in what I believe are called hide and seek sections. Ironic because, you can't hide from Vanny in the sections. The daycare attendant first appears in the daycare. What do you know? As Moon, they become aggressive and stalk you through the daycare, climbing into the play structures as you scramble to find generators. During the hour switches, Moon returns, pretty much guaranteeing your death if you don't make it to a charging pod with Freddy. He can be really fast here, so get to one quick. He's also able to rip you out of Glamrock Freddy, unlike the other animatronics. Vanessa doesn't kill you, but if she finds you, she'll cause a Glamrock animatronic to spawn, which will then kill you, so just avoid her. The last 2 special grade animatronics are Burntrap and the Blob, both of which only appear during the final boss battle, something you have to unlock after unlocking 6 AM. Burntrap is never a character that can actually kill you, instead sending the damaged Glamrock animatronics, whose mechanics I just don't feel like getting into. The Blob, however, can kill you. Partway through the Burntrap fight, their tentacles will start to appear, and you don't want to be grabbed by one of these or it's instant death. Now, I know what you're all wondering, what the f*** is a Burntrap? And that's how I'm going to pivot into this game's lore and story because it actually kinda sucks for the most part. Don't get me wrong, I love the cast of Security Breach to death. Every one of these characters feels like they belong in the series, and they contribute heavily to my enjoyment of the game. But what happens when you put a good character in a bad game? The video game equivalent of the Cleveland Show. You may have noticed that throughout my entire spiel going over every character and how they interact with the player, I omitted the man himself, Freddy. Well, if you haven't seen anything Security Breach ever, it might surprise you that Freddy is actually not an enemy in this game. In fact, he's the deuteragonist, assisting the player throughout basically every moment of the game. For some reason, Freddy is not corrupted by the glitch virus like the other animatronics are, and because of this, he actually helps Gregory try to escape the Pizzaplex. You can climb inside him to evade animatronic detection and get away, so long as he still has battery anyway. When he runs out, the glitch virus takes control and you die. And while Freddy being an ally is really cool, he's also stupidly overpowered in this game. Since you're able to summon him nearly anywhere so long as he's available in the story, you don't ever really have to worry about being caught by any animatronic so long as he's available. He moves quickly and can actually ward the others off with Chica's voice box that you can acquire later on. The only animatronic to really counter him is Moon, but you see him so few times that it's basically pointless. That's really my one complaint about Freddy in this game. He's far too easy to rely on for the majority of the runtime you'll be spending in this game. I think some of the most standout moments are the ones where Freddy is unavailable, such as the daycare or starting showtime. These are the few times the game feels like it has any sort of actual difficulty since you don't have a big robot to protect you anymore. All that being said, how does this game connect back to the previous entries in the series? Well, with the inclusion of the glitch trap virus in Vanny, it connects back to Help Wanted, and that's basically it. Oh, Vanessa is also here, and she sorta got name drop in FNaF AR, so that's neat. Other than that, there's really not anything. At least until you get to the final boss. The final boss actually takes place in the same pizzeria as the one in Freddy Fazbear's Pizza Sim, which is really cool. But, oh, I don't like the look of that bunny. Burntrap is probably the character a lot of FNaF fans checked out over, being the pseudo-revival of a character who had a very definitive and satisfying ending to fans in the game Ultimate Custom Night. For many people, Burntrap was just Steel Wool and Scott bringing Springtrap back because he's a popular character. And fair enough, that's definitely what's happening here, but I think so long as his backstory is substantiated, it'll be worth seeing him again. So what is the backstory? Oh, the game doesn't tell us? Oh, and what about the blob? Nothing? Sheesh. Okay, we're 0-2 so far on characters in the final boss battle. How about Vanny? What's her deal? Well, she's definitely Vanessa. Probably. Oh wait, no, definitely. Kind of. Shit, surely there's something good here. Here's a Michael Afton themed room. What does it mean? Look at the funny code on the wall. Crush the vile band, am I right? What does that mean? Fuck you. Here's a room full of sticky notes with a robot family. Eat a dick. Therapy tapes. What did they mean? I don't fucking know. A lot of Security Breach's attempts to give the player some lore end up feeling completely undercooked in comparison to just about everything else. Nothing actually gets explained, we just have random clues that point us to a multitude of different directions. Putting it this way, there's a lot of stuff you can talk about when it comes to figuring out what this game actually means, but on the flip side of things, you can't really connect any of it cleanly just by playing the games. In my opinion, I think Steel Wool was trying to leave a lot of this stuff unexplained, so that when the books started coming out in relation to this game in the series, we'd be able to draw connections. But that leads to a whole other kind of debate which I'll be happy to talk about later. There's also just bits and pieces of Security Breach that feel strange when juxtaposed to the rest of the series. This is definitely one of the more humor-driven FNaF games with an emphasis on the announcers saying things like, "Your parents won't love you," or ComedyBot just being an advertising machine. Oh, and for some reason, literally every employee's desk has this picture of Roxanne on it, and I bet you thought people were only weird about her in the real world. For now, let's move on from Security Breach's base game to Ruin. Probably the first FNaF content from Steel Wool I think the majority of FNaF fans can agree was good. Ruin takes place after the events of one of Security Breach's endings, most likely the Princess Quest ending since that's the one we find the most evidence for. It follows Cassie, a girl who knew Gregory from the base game and whose goal is to rescue him from the burnt out remains of the Pizzaplex, following some sort of earthquake. This earthquake was most likely caused by the blob tunneling through the Pizzaplex, thus ensuring the building's destruction no matter which ending is true. For many people, Ruin was Steel Wool taking criticisms of Security Breach to heart in order to make an overall better, more enjoyable game than the original. And in many ways, it worked. On top of the DLC being part of a free update, Ruin delivered in virtually every way people wanted, including with the speedrunners, with its really weird bugs we'll talk about. I think overall there's not much in terms of gameplay differences between Ruin and Security Breach, there's more so structural differences. For example, once again, you have a way to cheese animatronics and walk by them, but instead of it being a super tank like Freddy, it's now the Vanny mask. You can still get killed wearing it, but animatronics will not recognize you with it on, making it function more like the Freddy mask in FNaF II. This mask mechanic is also used to solve puzzles and has its own built-in threat in the form of Mexis. Mexis is sort of like Vanessa in a way, bringing animatronics to your location if you keep the mask on for too long. Ruin is also much more linear than Security Breach, having you jump from location to location very quickly instead of exploring the larger Pizzaplex like in the base game. This leads to the whole DLC just feeling much more streamlined than Security Breach, ditching fetch quests and hub areas for sequence after sequence. And it helps that this DLC is generally just scarier than Security Breach. While there are some sections where you straight up cannot die unless you make some big mistake, other areas are just great tension building pieces that lead to moments where you have to actually avoid some horror. The Ruin animatronics are also just super cool, especially Monty, who has just completely abandoned all speech in favor of growling. I've critiqued this element before as it seems like it may have just been done so they wouldn't have to cut Monty's VA another check, but in the game itself I think it works. I think overall Ruin is just in general a massive improvement to what Security Breach created. But it is still Security Breach, so there's a handful of issues. First up and off the bat, the bugs. It's once again very easy to break this game, just not in any of the fun ways you could break Security Breach. With a newfound fondness of invisible walls, Steelwool seems to have tried their hardest to prevent the player from going out of bounds, which, good for them, speedrunners still found a way. In order to boundary break and security breach, it was a matter of deloading certain parts of the map and approaching them when you weren't supposed to, oftentimes using Freddy to warp you into certain areas. But for Ruin, it's tricky. The virtual world and the real world are actually two separate maps, with you the player existing on only one of them at a time. To get out of bounds, you need to find specific parts of the map where the mask will teleport you in a way that's not intended. My friend David Barron has examples of this on his channel, so I'd go check that out if you're interested. But what about the rest of it? What about the story, the plot, the characters? Well, I generally find it to be interesting. Cassie, for what it is worth, is just a way more enjoyable protagonist than Gregory, and I don't really know why. I think it might just be that where Gregory came off as a general douchebag, Cassie has a caring side to her. This was definitely intentional if the Steelwool interview is anything to go off of, with Cassie being the healer. As Cassie moves throughout the Pizzaplex, she shows care for Chica and absolutely loves Roxy. I could really talk about this part of Ruin for ages, but there's one part I know y'all are desperate to hear me talk about: the Mimic. The Mimic finally appears in this game after several books in the Tales from the Pizzaplex series teased his appearance. It also led many to believe that the Mimic and Burntrap are the same entity, and while I'm not fully convinced of this, I do think it's probably true. The Mimic is an animatronic endoskeleton that is able to observe and mimic behaviors and voices, as well as contort its body to fit any size animatronic suit. It's a really cool character, and seeing them finally make their appearance here had me so unbelievably excited. In fact, when I first saw the Mimic, I was so overjoyed that finally we had proof that the books were canon. But you know, it's FNaF and FNaF fans, so there's still an argument to be made because of course there is. As it turns out, the Mimic was mimicking Gregory's voice the entire time to lure Cassie down there, and get her to open the wall to where he had been trapped. It's an overall really dark ending, especially since it's not clear if Cassie survives the elevator crash at the end. There's a lot that could be said for where the story is going after Ruin, but I actually want to take a step back a bit. Back to before Ruin, with Help Wanted 2, the latest game in the franchise. I've never given my full thoughts on Help Wanted 2, but let me say this. It's probably my current favorite game in the series. Help Wanted 2 took what worked from Help Wanted and Security Breach and trimmed the fat while giving us entirely new minigames to look forward to. As opposed to the first Help Wanted, in this game there are no remakes in the sense that you can play all of FNaF 1 again. Some levels from specific games are remade here, namely Sister Location, but it's overall still new content for the most part. I can't go into every minigame in depth because then we'd be here for like 4 hours, and the script is already very long, but let me rake down some of my personal favorites. Let's start with those Sister Location levels. The standout is resetting the circuit breakers, where a combination of different levers will power different areas. While this is happening, Funtime Freddy and later Yendo will be approaching you from an unknown angle, with only their voice or their vague silhouette showing where they are. This game mode is stressful, but so fun. Keeping track of the animatronic while trying to pull these levers makes for some very tense gameplay that I adore thoroughly. Then there's the DJ Music Man stages, essentially just matching puzzles but with a big spider in front of you. It's just kind of really fun to watch him get excited and also tremble in fear at his size. Next is the food court minigames, wherein you make specific meals for Staff Bots or Glamrock Chica, and if you fail, you die. Generally speaking, every minigame in this game is just super fun, and aside from the random ass convolution in getting the Freddy doll for one of the game's 2 endings, it's just a constant stream of good times. I didn't have a whole lot here to work with when describing Help Wanted 2. At the end of the day, the best way to understand why this game is so good is to just play it yourself. So here's a reel of highlights from when I played the game live on my channel.
I'm American. I shoot first, ask questions later. Bowling. Bowling. My own
He's about to hit you with a hammer.
The operation was a success.
No screaming.
Yay! It is legally binding.
There you go.
Next scenario.
Okay.
The patient is suffering from arcade-related injury.
Huffing your own laughing gas in the middle of doing the surgery.
Look, I need to calm down, you know? Patient needs to calm down, doctor needs to calm down.
Now, give the patient a candy. This candy makes the patient stabilize. Yay!
Alright, cool.
There's so much wrong with what I just watched.
Alright, Zach, you gotta voice act with Freddy.
Hello, it's me, a children's drawing Freddy. I'm from the UK. Hello, I'm a British puppet doll.
Alright, that's just Stocko. You know what they call me, Zachary Jr.?
What do they call you?
Bowling.
Okay. What are you doing?
I'm a hot dog. Okay, hot dog. Fuck. Phew. Hey, what did I win? L Chips ad. Great. I love winning advertising.
Yippee. Capitalism has gone this far now. That you
Yeah.
as a prize you win an ad.
And with that, I've talked about every mainline FNaF game up to the present, and this video is definitely going to be 2 parts because this is already my longest video ever, and I still have a whole 3-book series and a movie to eventually cover. I wanted the whole thing to be out before August, but realistically, it ended up not being possible. So if you like this video, be sure to subscribe and tell me you want to see a part 2 covering the other FNaF media. Until then, I'm demuted, and thank you for watching, as well as thank you to Posture and David Barron for their contributions to this video. Peace.